Yeah, so I think a few more tweaks and we should pretty much be there.
Yeah, man, it looks good. And this whole remote working thing, it's not too bad.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're getting stuff done. But it'd be nice to grab lunch or something sometime.
Totally. I'm free now.
Let's do it. Today we're going to build 2 different and complete DIY desks. Well, actually 3. But this one we'll just talk about and then build in a separate video because it's too long to include. So 2 desks. But this one does sit 2 people, so I guess that's kind of like 3 desks. Alright, settled. We're building 2 desks that sit 3 people on 4S. Wait, I think we already showed the title screen. Okay, so the first desk is going to be really simple. And actually, let me explain the situation. Chris? Hi. So actually, before I explain, let me just say that this officially launches the Rockler Desk Challenge, which we're going to be hosting from now until the 5th of November. So it's free to enter. There's going to be a bunch of good prizes. And if you want to find out more details, just stay tuned to the end of the video. All right, so the situation. Like I'm sure a lot of you right now, we have an increased need for desks due to the pandemic and the fact that our second grader is distance learning. So I wanted to build something that ticked the following boxes. It needed to be useful, obviously, cheap, have the ability to seat 2 people, my wife and my kid, and be temporary, hopefully. And here's what I came up with. So the desk uses 1 sheet of Baltic birch plywood, which costs about $65. That said, you could use any plywood that you want. And then this tool chest that cost me another $129. So $194 for a 2-person desk isn't bad, but if you think a little deeper, the desk is actually quite a bit cheaper than that. And that's because I use Baltic birch plywood all the time, mostly for cabinets and carcasses and that sort of thing. And because I'm leaving the panel so big, I'm going to be able to use 95% of this when we're done using it for a desk. So I'll be generous and say that 10% of it was wasted. So $65, that means $6.50. As for the tool chest, I'm definitely going to be able to use that once we're done using it for the desk. In fact, I've already got a space for it. But let's just say that I didn't want it. So I took a look on Craigslist just to see what something like this would go for. I mean, it's basically brand new, and it looks like I could probably sell it for about $80. So let's say that I take a $50 loss on that. Let's call it $10 between my plywood, sandpaper, screws, all that stuff. So $60 for a 2-person desk is about what I'd be at, and that's pretty good. All right, now let's actually build it. So we'll start off by cutting our 3 large panels to size. And if you don't have a way to make these cuts, you could actually have the fine people at the lumberyard do this for you with their panel saw. So here are the dimensions for those pieces. If you do that, one thing to be aware of is that when you tell the person to rip it in half, they're probably going to set it up to cut at 24 inches. And assuming that their blade is 1/8 of an inch wide, that'll result in a piece that's 24 inches wide and a piece that's 23 7/8 of an inch wide. Which isn't the end of the world, but yeah, I'll let you decide how much you want the person at the store to hate you. But assuming that you want to DIY it, or DY it, I guess the other one's redundant, what you'll do is set up a long straight edge to rip the entire length of the plywood at just shy of 24 inches. Split the plywood into as close as 2 equal halves as you can. And remember to factor in the distance from your base plate to the blade on your circular saw when you're setting up your straight edge. Now we can set aside the half that'll be the top, and with the other piece, we need to cross-cut 2 pieces at 28 3/4 of an inch long. And you can set this up the same way that we did with the first cut, but if you have a large square, now might be a good time to utilize it. To attach our 2 leg panels to our top, we're going to clamp them together and then just use some screws. And you don't need to be nearly as picky as I'm being, but if you want perfect screw placement, here's a diagram that shows what I did on each end. And with that all marked out, I'm going to drill some pilot holes with this bit that'll also countersink my screws. And you can pick up one of these from rockler.com, or again, you can be less fancy. Okay, now I'm going to sand the pieces, paying extra attention to making sure that I round over all of the sharp edges. And I'm not going to be putting any finish on this one since I want to be able to reuse these panels later. As you can see in this shot, this thing is super wobbly at this point, so the next thing I'm going to do is hold my tool chest next to one of the side pieces to measure the distance between the underside of the top and the top of the tool chest. Then you can cut a few strips to fill that gap, or if you want to get fancy, make a U-shaped piece like this. And honestly, that's about it for this one. The only other thing that I did was make this little plate that I'll screw to the back for some cable management. Basically, I can hook up whatever I need to and then use some zip ties to keep them looking clean. All right, let's move on to the intermediate DIY desk. So this is one of those projects that you could do with a limited set of tools. I'd say a drill, a sander, some clamps, and either a track saw or a table saw, and one sheet of plywood. So I'm going to use both a table saw and a track saw to try to show you how to make the various types of cuts using either. And furthermore, if you're using a track saw, you could use a traditional kind or something like the ACS, which is essentially a track saw on a table, which really helps with speeding up some of the setup times and just kind of makes things a little bit safer. But either way, regardless of what tools you're using, the first step is going to be breaking down your sheet of plywood. So I started by making two partial crosscuts 19 inches deep at 24 inches from one end and 34 inches from the other end. And by the way, you can use a circular saw instead of a table saw or a track saw as well, which I assumed you assumed. Next, I'll cut these pieces free, and then really we're just going to work our way through cutting out a bunch of rectangles, and you can do this however you like. But the only important thing would be to just leave each piece slightly oversized for now so that you can refine them after. And here's an image of their finished sizes if you want to pause and write them down. And here's a better image. And we'll go into more detail on some of these when we start working on them. The only extra thing to note for now is for these two pairs of oversized rectangles, which will become the four legs eventually. We're going to laminate them together into two rectangular chunks. And once those have dried, we can start cutting those out. So the first thing that you'll want to do is cut your blocks into rectangles the following sizes. And the red pieces are the front legs and the blue pieces are the back legs. And actually the length dimension doesn't really matter right now, so that's just the shortest that they can be. So just make sure that you leave them long for now. Alright, so in this shot you can see that, for example, on the front leg we need to cut an angle at 20 degrees. So we can go ahead and do this on our table saw with a crosscut sled or a miter gauge or using a track saw or even a miter saw. Either way, with that cut, next we'll measure out 30 and 5/8 of an inch from that cut and then make another cut at the same 20-degree angle. So now we've got a parallelogram. Now we can measure and mark out the taper that we want to cut. So on one end, I'll mark out 1.5 inches, and then on the other end, 3¼ inches. And I like to draw out the taper just to help me visualize things, but you don't technically need to. Really, the only important marks would be to transfer the marks on both ends down across the thickness of your piece, and make sure to keep track of which side of the line your blade should go on. To make the taper cuts on a table saw, a tapering jig is ideal, but if you don't have one, another option is to make a quick sled. To do that, I'll grab a piece of scrap plywood, lock my fence in position, and establish a clean edge. And the position of my fence doesn't really matter. All that matters is that I don't touch it from now until I'm done cutting all of my tapers. Next, I'll clamp my workpiece to the sled so that the offcuts are just hanging off the edge that we just established. Then I'll take a few more pieces of scrap and screw them to the sled to keep the piece in position. I usually like to do 2 along the edge of my workpiece, 1 at the back of the workpiece, and a few more to create a bridge like this, which will act as a clamp. And with that all set up, I'll cut my first leg. Now I'm going to take the offcut and flip it around 180 degrees and take another pass to make the other leg. And there you go, 2 identical legs. Next, we'll need to repeat the same step of making a parallelogram, marking out the taper, and cutting them on the sled for the back legs. And here are the dimensions for that piece. And in reality, you should cut out both parallelograms first and then make the sled for your tapers, rather than having to reset things up multiple times. Now, to do it with the track saw, you don't need any jig, and a lot of the concepts are largely the same, so I'm going to explain it in a quick animation just to give you a different look. So you'd again start off by cutting your piece into a parallelogram. Then you'd mark out the taper that you want to cut and line up your marks with the grooves in the tabletop. Or drawing out the line here would actually be useful because you could just line that up with the track. Either way, with your piece positioned, clamp down a fence to reference that position and make your first cut. Now again, you can flip the offcut around 180 degrees and make the second cut. And again, you'd end up with two identical legs. Okay, we're not done with the tapers just yet. Actually, only halfway, as we still need to make 4 more pieces, which will become the sides for our top assembly. Which, by the way, I should mention is totally optional. I'm including it because my kid's gonna be the one using this desk, so I think that'll be useful to store some items and to keep his pencils and stuff from falling off. But for an adult, maybe not as useful. You can make that decision. But if you do choose to include them, here are all of the dimensions that you'll need, and the process is exactly the same. So while I'm taking care of that, let's take a second to thank ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. So if you're anything like me, pretty much your entire life is online at this point. And that's why it's crucial to keep your privacy and security in mind. Having a VPN or a virtual private network is like having a secret, secure tunnel between your devices and the internet. And this is extra important now for a lot of us who are working from home, dealing with confidential information, and without the supervision of office IT departments that we might be used to. But ExpressVPN encrypts your connection using the highest standard of encryption currently available. And that means your passwords, financial details, and even your emails are protected against anybody who might want to see them. In addition to that, ExpressVPN hides your location and even lets you pick a different location with servers in 94 different countries. So one added benefit of that I personally really enjoy is, let's just say that many of the most popular streaming services that I and probably you use have different content available in different regions. Like Rick and Morty in the UK. So if you're familiar at all with VPNs, then you probably know that there are a few out there to choose from. But here are some of the things that make ExpressVPN the best. First, they only invest in premium servers, making them consistently faster than other providers. Next, they have 24/7 customer support, so if you ever have an issue, they can answer your question in seconds. And third, it's really easy to use. You can fire up the app and connect with just one click. So find out how you can get 3 months for free by clicking in the description box below or heading over to expressvpn.com/4eyes. All right, thanks ExpressVPN. Let's get back to the build. The next step is to cut the stretcher pieces that'll connect our 2 legs together. So to do this, I'm going to set my pieces up like this so that I know that the tops are coplanar, and then I'll position the bottom legs 25 inches apart. Then I can mark out where I need to cut the stretcher to match the inside angles of each leg. And you can cut both of these pieces to be identical, but when it comes to attaching them, remember that we're making legs that are mirror images of one another, since the legs are 2 pieces thick, but the stretchers are only 1 piece thick. So just keep track of that. Next, I'm going to put together the leg sub-assemblies as well as the L-shaped assemblies for the top portion. And I'm going to use glue and dowels to do this. To assemble the rest of the desk, I'm going to use a mixture of pocket screws and regular screws. And since it's kind of hard to tell exactly what I'm doing, let's cut to a quick animation. So I put 2 pocket holes on each end of my 2 apron pieces, and those will connect our leg sub-assemblies together. I also put about 6 pocket holes on the inside face of each apron along the top edge that'll eventually be used to go into the desktop. Next, we'll connect our drawer box housing pieces, And this one will get screwed into the side of the leg subassembly, and the other one will get attached through the back of the front apron. And each of these is also going to get a few pocket holes on the inside top edge to attach to the desktop. We'll also put some pocket holes in our privacy panel, as well as the back panel for the top piece. And once we have the desktop on, we can attach the top piece with a few screws through the underside of the desktop. So back in the real world, to help me position things, I'm using a few business cards as spacers and then just clamping and screwing together. No glue. Okay, finally with all of my pieces put together, I can put the tabletop on. But before I do that, I'm going to cut a bevel along the front edge and both sides. And then I can go ahead and make my drawer box. So we're going to keep this super simple, and I'm just doing butt joints and glue. Then I'm going to cut a bottom piece that's oversized and glue it on as well. And I like to let it sit for about 5 minutes before I clamp it up so that it doesn't slide around. Then once it's dry, I can sand it flush and start attaching my hardware. But before I do that, I'm going to strike a line 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and eventually I'll reinforce the joints with some screws here as well as through the bottom. But we'll do that after the hardware is on so that we can make sure it doesn't interfere. For the drawer front, I decided to cut this angular piece, but if you think that it's funky, you could make it a rectangle. And to attach it, we'll just do a few screws through the inside of the box and into the back side of the face. Alright, let's back up for a second to talk about the finish. So obviously you can use anything that you want, but for Baltic birch plywood, and especially for a desk for my kid, I like water-based poly. And rather than waiting until the very end, I like to finish pieces as I go before I assemble things, just because it's easier to get to them. So for pretty much everything, I put on 2 coats of finish, then lightly sanded with 320 grit sandpaper, put on another coat, and then aggressively rubbed it with a brown paper sack after it was all done, just to remove any little dust bits that found their way into the finish. So that's a total of 3 coats on everything, except for the top, which got an extra 1 or 2 coats.
Leave me alone. Take a walk, mister. Hey, take a walk, but not in front of me. Ooh, that's a slither.
And for the drawer front, I had this yellow paint matched to match the yellow of this wall control panel that I installed on the back panel. So you guys might be used to seeing these things in my shop, and they're super useful, but I've never used them on a project like this. But with all the little shelves and accessories that you can get for them, I'm sure that they're going to be equally useful. Plus, I think they just kind of look cool. The last thing that I wanted to do was make a handle for my drawer front. So I looked through my scrap, but I didn't really see anything that I liked. So I opted for a piece from my 1/2-inch stash instead. And after getting it all shaped, positioned, and ready to attach, I decided that I didn't like it. And actually, it was purely aesthetic anyway, since the easiest way to open the drawer is by grabbing it from the underside. So with the elimination of that, we're done. Challenge. So first things first, there's a website up that has all of the information there. So if I forget to mention anything, I'll put a link to that in the description so you can go check it out. But the basic idea is we want as many people as we can to participate and have the chance to win some cool prizes. As for rules, it's pretty loose. Basically build a desk or a workstation, anything that'll suit your needs, and enter on Instagram by using the hashtag #RocklerDeskChallenge. And we encourage you to submit not only pictures of your finished project, but also ideas as you have them, or progress pics while you're building, or anything that you like. And like I said, you have from now until November 5th, 2020 to enter by using the hashtag on Instagram. And we'll be talking about it on our podcast, the Modern Maker Podcast, pretty much from now and throughout the end of the competition. And then we'll be choosing winners over there. And we'll have a link to the podcast in the description as well. And I think that pretty much covers it. So if you need a desk or a workstation, it's a great opportunity to participate, see what other people are doing, maybe win something cool, get some new ideas. And we really look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. And huge thanks to Rockler for helping us to host this event again this year. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what you come up with. So I'll see you in the next one of my videos, and hopefully I'll see what you do. All right.